Welcome to the Agent Bridge podcast. We're your hosts, Brandon Baca.
And I'm Marl Hessen.
The Agent Bridge is the proven path to real estate success without the burnout. All right, episode 18, negotiation. But before we get into negotiation, I want to talk about just general market conditions. We do this every once in a while just so we can contribute to the real estate community and talk about, you know, how to handle the changes that are going on in the marketplace, because we don't want to come from a place of like head in the sand, nothing's going wrong. There are definitely changes in the marketplace. There are things that are different. They're changing. It feels like a little bit of a roller coaster with interest rates and, you know, the Fed and all of that stuff. So today is, we're in the tail end of February. I think what's today? The 22nd when we're recording this. So I don't know where we are in the stock market today because I haven't checked this morning. But yeah, the Dow dropped like 600 points yesterday.
Yep.
Interest rates are probably creeping up towards 7, or they are at 7.
Yeah, they're creeping up towards 7 for sure. Okay. It wasn't even 2 weeks ago that we said interest rates dropped to like, I was locking people at like 5.9 something.
Right.
Now, you know, they've crept back up to 7. There's just a lot of uncertainty. There's just a ton of uncertainty. Are we going into a recession? Are we not? Is the Fed bluffing about continuing to raise interest rates, or are they not? I think we know now that they're not bluffing.
Yeah.
So a lot of, you know, the initial baked in interest rate hikes that the Fed was going to do, that they publicized that they were going to do, were already baked into the rates.
Right.
So that was fine. But when they continue to be aggressive about, you know, raising the interest rates, it scared a lot of people, and the rates are going up. And so right now, I mean, it's a bummer, because what you wanted to say was come springtime, rates were going to be in the high 5s or low 6s.
Right.
You know, and then we were going to have a great spring, but we just don't know what's going to happen with the rates. But I want to stress this. It is still a good time to buy if you need to buy.
Yeah.
Are you going to pay a little bit more in interest rate? Sure. Are you going to have an opportunity to refinance later? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. They will drop.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have to give them some time, maybe a little bit more than we wanted, but they will drop.
Right.
And you're going to get seller concessions right now.
Mm-hmm.
Sellers still need to sell. Buyers still need to buy. You're still going to get a quote-unquote good deal, because they're going to offer things like closing costs, or possibly a rate buy down, or repair money, or whatever it is. But you're going to have an opportunity to buy a house that you like for a quote-unquote good deal.
Right. Yeah, you can get a good deal, and houses are going to still go up in value. Where, you know, I think, you know, even like Warren Buffett is like, you do the opposite of what everybody else is doing. So everybody else is sort of like not taking action, not doing anything, and you want to take the opposite approach. If, you know, your buyers want to take an opposite approach to the market, because you can get concessions. You don't have to bring a ton of cash, or as much cash as you had to in the previous market. And, you know, I think for real estate agents, how real estate agents need to be thinking is in your percentage of market share, that you can grab more percentage of market share, because a lot of agents are taking this wait and see approach. They're sort of like, we don't know what's going on in the market. They're getting discouraged. And it's really about your personal discipline, your daily actions as a real estate agent. Are you going to work harder? Are you going to be more disciplined? Are you going to have to focus more on time management? Absolutely. But that's what it's going to take to play in this market. And understanding that if you do those things, you can still sell as much or more, because a lot of agents are dumping out of the market or are not taking an aggressive stance by, you know, tightening the screws on your daily activity.
This is certainly going to thin the herd. There's going to be a lot of agents that came into this business 2 years ago. You know, times were good. They realized that it's a little bit more difficult in times like these than they want it to be. They're going to exit real estate, not going to pay the fees, not going to pay the E&O insurance, all this. And it will thin the herd, and you will have an opportunity to pick up a lot more buyers.
Yeah.
But you have, like you said, you have to be disciplined. But I'd really just do want to stress it's bad news on one hand, but it's a good time to buy, and it'll all work itself out. So stay diligent, do the things that you know produce a pipeline for yourself, and you'll have business.
Yeah, and I'm talking to real estate agents all the time. Agents, I just talked to an agent who just got their first house under contract. I talked to an agent that put 2 houses under contract last week, and so all of that activity is still out there, but you have to hunt harder for it. You have to be more disciplined to get it. So yeah, just make sure if you're focused on anything, don't focus on the news. Don't focus on, the latest article. Don't focus on social media, but focus on your activity in generating new business and serving your customers well. Okay, let's get to the topic at hand, which is negotiation. And it's interesting because this last market, by the way, I thought this would be a really good topic to bring up because there's a lot of agents that are listeners that they came into the market during COVID. And so they don't really have a lot of experience with negotiation because you typically just
write and pray.
Write and pray,
Yeah.
Or it was more about winning a multiple offer situation in this previous market. And so now there are agents who really haven't ever had to negotiate very much, or agents that came in before COVID that have lost their ability or lost their skill set in negotiating. So I thought it'd be good for us to talk about how to negotiate properly, to how to sort of reset our mindset, how to communicate with buyers and sellers during that process of a new market. So yeah, I thought it'd be good to talk about, again, negotiation. So the first thing that I'll say, if you're a real estate agent and you're new, negotiation isn't what you think it is. I think we have this sort of like Hollywood perception or just basically this haggling type perception of like, you got to get a great deal. And if I've got the money, I need to work to get a great deal for my clients or so on and so forth. So typically it's not what you think it is. The other thing I'll say is American culture is not really a haggle culture.
No, very uncomfortable for Americans.
Right. So we like negotiate on two things because you don't negotiate on the price of your iPhone. You don't negotiate on, whatever, your college education. There's so many things we don't negotiate on. You sort of just buy them and move on, and things are what they are. Things cost what they cost. But in other cultures across the world, they negotiate on everything. And so that's sort of built into their culture. So for us, it's negotiation is a little awkward. So yeah, we're not that familiar with it. So, but the thing to remember is houses, when we're negotiating houses, there's really not a lot of room in a standard home purchase. Typically, houses are going to sell within 3% of their asking price. So when people are coming when buyers are coming into this market saying, yeah, I want a great deal, you're really not going to see that big of a swing. You might get 3%, 2% off of the price, but typically you're going to get really, really close to asking price when you're negotiating on a home, and where you'll see a lot of maybe more concessions are going to be in the seller paid closing costs, or when sellers pay the buyer's closing costs. So just keep that in mind. It's like we're not talking about 10, 20% of asking price. We're talking about, when we're negotiating, typically we're talking about 3%. And if you are doing some hardcore negotiation where you're getting like, houses for $20,000 under, $30,000 under, or 10 or 20%, typically it's a distress situation.
Or it wasn't priced appropriately.
Or it wasn't priced appropriately in the first place. So, again, you're not going to get big swings in price. And so really the bulk of negotiation for real estate agents is in the proper setting of expectations for the client.
Absolutely.
So what their perception is coming into the market versus the reality. So you've got to kind of shape or reshape typically a client's reality in terms of purchasing a home.
It's the same as any negotiation, right? So you negotiate with your kids, with your wife, at work, with peers. You have a situation where there's something that you really want and then something you're willing to accept. And it usually lands somewhere in the middle.
Right.
So same with houses, right? So you may have a price, if you're a seller, you may have a price that you really want and a price you're willing to accept. Usually it's going to land somewhere in the middle.
Somewhere in the middle of that. That's absolutely right. The other thing is houses they have emotional value. I mean, if you think about like when someone's shopping for a house, one of the things they say is like, we'll know it's the one when we walk in.
Yeah.
Right. And so you're dealing with a lot of emotional value in terms of buying a home. And so typically the buyers want it or they don't. I mean, in all of my years in real estate, 15 years in real estate, I've only been in a couple of situations where a client was okay with making an offer on this house. And if that doesn't work out, they'll go with this one.
Yeah. It's rare.
Yeah. So you typically, it's their, they've bought into a particular home, which can cause all kinds of problems, which we'll get into later. But
yeah, all right, just raise the asking price.
Right, exactly. So, so it's just important to understand, where buyers are coming into the market or what their expectation is, and so, so the other thing I think is really important, and you can kind of speak to this from a mortgage perspective, is a lot of times when we're negotiating, we're in the $10,000 to $20,000 pricing or difference between what the buyers are asking and the sellers are willing to sell for. And from a mortgage perspective, it's really almost insignificant.
Yeah, like $10 a month or something.
Right.
So it is, but people really want to feel like they got a good deal.
Yeah.
Both sides want to feel like they won. And that's where that last little 10,000. I'm not going to get pushed over for this last 10,000. And
it's important to talk about that on the top of the deal, like before you even start. That's why I'm a big advocate of buyer consultation, because if you talk about negotiation and the buyer consultation, and you talk about the statistics and you talk about the monthly mortgage payment and what the difference is, it's like between $5,000. I mean, it's going to be, $30 a month on your monthly mortgage payment. So it's largely insignificant when we get into that difference, that small difference in negotiation. But you're right. That's the thing is both buyers and sellers want to feel like they've won. They're not okay with compromise.
No.
Or the idea of compromise.
Yeah, don't even bring that word up.
It's true. Yeah, you can't tell. He's like, well, let's compromise on this. They're going to be like, no, I've got the best house in the neighborhood, or no, we're a cash buyer, or we've got, I don't know, whatever the case may be for that buyer. They don't want to ever feel like they're conceding anything.
No, and negotiation is all about making the other party feel like the solution was their idea.
Yeah. Like
you're trying to craft the discussion and the negotiation in such a way that where you arrive, they feel like it was their idea.
Right.
And there's an art to it. It's not easy and it's not natural. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of good books out there about negotiation, but it's that's really the goal.
Yeah, absolutely. So make sure, again, talk about your strategy in the buyer consultation or in the listing consultation. Talk about your strategy for negotiation. Then that way you're just reminding them once we get into it, once we get into negotiation, you're reminding them of what you already told them. And that's going to make that conversation a lot easier, or that negotiation a lot easier, if you're sort of talking to them about what you've already talked to them about. So you're just reminding them or setting the expectations in the right way.
And as a real estate agent, you are negotiating multiple times throughout the process. You are not just negotiating the price of a house or the final deal, the final contract. You're negotiating with the seller on what you want to list the house at. You're negotiating with your buyers on maybe they have expectations that are too high. Mm-hmm. You're negotiating throughout the entire process, not just on the final contract.
Right.
So it's really important that you learn this skill.
It's incredibly important. And again, the more you have these conversations before you get into it, the better. And just as an aside to that, if you just take somebody out and start showing them houses. Now, If you're dealing with an internet lead source, you do need to show up and show them at least one house before you have a buyer consultation. If it's a referral, you need to have the buyer consultation before you start looking at houses, because the likelihood is on referral business, they're ready to buy. And if you're talking to them about negotiation strategy while they're in the house that they love, they're not hearing a word that you're saying.
Mm-mm.
They're caught up in these sort of, they've bought into the property, they bought into the house. They're not thinking about the best strategy.
No.
So make sure you have that conversation on the front end. Okay, so when it comes to, so let's talk about buyers for just a second. And when it comes to making the offer. So the first thing you do when you've got a client that's marginally interested in a property, let's say, oh, this is our number one right now, or we're out looking at houses, like, we really like this one. Okay, let's keep this on the list. The first thing that I do when, I'm going to, when we're in the process of showing houses, is I call the agent, the listing agent, and I ask them, what do you got working on it? That way, when you get to the next house during showings, you can say, hey, look, I called the listing agent on that property. This is what's going on with it. So you can sort of speak knowledgeably. But the other thing is you need to get ahead of, if there is another offer on the property, or if somebody's circling the drain of writing an offer, that way you can know if there's some urgency to writing something up. And what you don't want to do is get to, the end of the day and, say, hey, and then call the agent at that point and it's already under contract.
Yeah, there's tons of ways that can play out too, right? You're putting it on the listing agent's radar that you're at least interested.
Exactly.
So they're not going to accept any, rash offers.
Right.
But and you have to also learn to weed through what that listing agent tells you. Like, oh yeah, we've got a lot of people that are going to put an offer in on this one.
There's never a situation, very rarely, probably less than 10% of the time, where I call a listing agent, they go, do you have anything working on it? They go, nope. Like, they always are like, well, we got 5 showings tomorrow.
Yeah.
So
a lot of people are saying they're going to put in an offer. I'm like,
yeah.
Do you have an offer?
They're
going to say they're going to put in an offer.
Let's translate real quick.
Yeah.
Oh, we got several showings for tomorrow means nothing's working on it.
Yeah.
If they say, well, we've got some people about to write an offer, that means they have one person who maybe mentioned it 3 days ago.
Yeah.
And if they say, yeah, we've got we do have a multiple offer situation, they could really be in a multiple offer, but it's probably not. It's somewhere in the process of being written and submitted.
Almost universally true.
Yeah.
Unless they come back with, we have an offer and the deadline is 11 a.m.
Yes.
They don't have an offer. They will say, we have an offer and here's when we have to decide if they truly have something in hand. They're going to be definitive about it. Because guess what? They want to put some urgency on you to write the offer too. So right. You'll have everything you need to know, and you'll be able to weed through kind of the BS. But you have to learn to do that too, because every agent's going to say, yeah, we got tons of interest.
Yeah, that's right. I like that though process of saying, if somebody says, yeah, we've got, we've got an offer coming in, or we've got an offer on the property, you can say, when is the acceptance time?
Absolutely. And you should. Yeah. Because you need to just make sure you get it in before that. And if they know that you plan to submit an offer, they're probably not going to accept the other deal before they've seen what you have to offer. Right. The listing agent may call you an hour beforehand and be like, hey, we haven't seen anything. Do you still plan to submit an offer? And be like, yeah, we're working on it. So they're going to wait, most likely.
Right. The other thing is that once you have an idea of that status, then you begin to shape your offer. And there are lots of things to consider. There's concessions, there's pricing strategy, and all that stuff. And how I get this communicated to the buyer in this situation is to get them to equate whatever they're going to do with risk, okay, and strategy. So I never really tell the buyer, oh, that's the wrong thing to do. You shouldn't do that thing. I just get them to sort of process risk in the offer writing process. So, again, I'm like, well, we can take a couple of different strategies here. We can offer low, right? But you're increasing the risk that seller or that the listing agent is going to call all the people that were marginally interested and bring them back in, right? Or you can offer at asking price with whatever you're going to ask in terms of concessions. And then that way we can start to dial in. That's going to move things along faster. I think.
Yeah. I don't love all these strategies that popped up through COVID, the escalation clauses and whatnot. I just think it's much simpler and cleaner. And I think people need to learn to feel this way about the process, where submit the offer that makes you comfortable about the price you paid for the home.
Right. So
if the home is listed for $530 and you think that there's a lot of interest and it's worth $540 to you, submit $540.
Yeah.
Your agent will help you determine if that's a smart move. But, if you really wouldn't pay more than $525 for the house, submit $525. But submit the highest offer that you feel comfortable paying for the home, and then let it be.
Yeah.
And the escalation clauses and whatnot, those are born out of, I want to pay the least amount for the house that I can.
Yeah.
But I'm willing to pay more. Well, that just tells me that it's worth more to you than you're offering for your initial offer.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And again, it's so funny to me because so much of this is perception of value. Typically, when a listing agent is pricing a property, they're producing comps for the seller, and the seller is choosing something that aligns with the comparables. And you do need to double check that, by the way, when you're the buyer's agent. Like, get the comps out, review them with the buyers, and say, hey, look, based on the other things that are in this neighborhood, based on the average price or the price per square foot or most of what's going on in this neighborhood, they are within this percentage of comparables, right? And typically, it's right on the money. Now, they may be a little high or low based on the condition of the property.
Yeah.
But they've priced it according to the comps in the neighborhood in most cases. So you're not going to get big swings in value. And because a lot of buyers don't want to pay full price for a property, but it's like the property is going to go up in value. So really the way to win in real estate is not to beat the sellers down on the price. As a matter of fact, this is something that I think is funny. People will work over a seller for $2,500 or $5,000, but they were willing to pay the bank front-loaded interest for 3 to 5 years, like an exorbitant amount. So basically what the banks do is they take, the interest, all the interest that's on the property, right?
Yep.
And then they front-load all that interest on the front end of the loan so that the bank makes all their money in the first 3 years.
Yeah, it is interesting. And you don't operate that way in any other aspect of your life. You don't go into Best Buy and say, hey, this TV's $2,000. I think that's too much money, so I'm going to offer you $1,900, but I'll go up to $2,000. It's just a very awkward situation. Yeah. And yes, people nitpick over $2,500 on massive purchase prices, and you're just like, all right, what are we doing here?
Well, that's the thing. It's like, well, even if it's $5,000, you're going to make that. The bank makes $5,000 on you in the first 2 months. And so to me, the way to really win in real estate is to make an extra payment a year on a house. It's like if you make one extra principal payment a year on a property, it takes 7 years off the mortgage.
Yes.
So yeah, people have the wrong mindset when they're negotiating. It's like, quit beating the seller up for $5,000. Just pay one extra principal payment a year and you're beating the bank. That's who you need to beat. And it's so funny because they're raking it in. Banks are raking in on the interest. So anyway.
For sure.
Okay. So once you've considered the house, the price of the house compared to the comparables, again, you'll make hopefully a reasonable offer. What I like to do is, like, when you submit the offer, to summarize the high points of the offer so that the agent can communicate that quickly. So when they're reviewing it, they're not hunting for things if you just summarize it in the email. So, and then again, you may have a couple of back and forth counter offers, but the buyer needs to keep in mind that the payment isn't largely affected and that the house will be going up in value long term. So just kind of keep all of that in mind. I think also a helpful tool or a helpful thing that I say is like, hey, listen, you've already won, right? You're getting this house at a good price. It's going to go up in value over the next 3 to 5 years. So you're winning already by purchasing a home right now.
Yeah.
So everything else is just gravy. Okay, let's talk about selling a property. So pricing correctly is the best strategy in selling a property.
Agreed.
Go ahead. What were you going to say?
No, I
Okay.
was waiting on you to finish your point. I do agree with pricing it appropriately. I think now, more importantly than ever, that allows you not to sit on the market.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's always been important to price it appropriately. I think during COVID it was less important. Now I think it's ultra important because that's the difference between sitting on the market for 90 days versus sitting on the market for 15 days.
Right. So again, some people will say like pricing it under comps or under pricing it is a really great strategy. In my experience, I've found that sellers are too risk averse. They don't want to like, what if somebody makes me a full price offer? Then do I have to accept it? That sort of creeps into their mind. So most sellers are going to be risk averse and not wanting to accept or underprice their property. But I mean, theoretically it works.
Yeah, I've actually had clients that thought if someone submitted an offer at asking price, you had to accept it.
Yes.
Have you ever run into that?
Yeah, I hear that all the
My mind was
time.
blown. I was like, it's your house. You don't have to accept anything.
Well, no, it's really interesting when sellers do that. They go, well, I gotta accept it. I was like, no, you don't have to accept
you still
anything.
have a choice. Yeah. So I actually like that strategy as well. Slightly under it, almost always, the seller won't do that. But there's just, as an agent right now, there is so much buyer demand and so little inventory. It will work out in your favor right now. Now that might not always be true. You might need to come in and try to price it more appropriately. But right now, slightly under, I think, is a good strategy.
Well, at any rate, I think that, if let's say, because you're typically going to come somewhere in the middle on a pricing strategy. So, or when you're sort of comping a house. So let's say, typically you're going to come in as like, oh, well, this house is worth $450 to $300 based on the comps. Well, I'm probably going to price it at $449. Or if it's, $572, I'm probably going to price it at $569 or $565 to draw interest. And I'm going to be thinking about how people search for homes or what pricing points that people search for homes to price it appropriately. So just keep this in mind. You need to keep in front of you all of the other houses that are on the market in your price range within a mile. Because the best out of 10 will win. And you need to be objective about that. It's like, well, okay, of the 10 houses that are on the market between 550 and 600,000, am I the best one? And that house is the one that's going to sell.
Yes.
Okay. By the way, all sellers think their house is the best house in the neighborhood.
Always. I have never had somebody be honest about that.
The other thing that sellers say that I think is interesting is, well, we have to get this amount.
Yeah. Well, honestly, that's not the buyer's problem.
Right.
What you put into the house and what you think it's worth when it's actually not worth that is not the buyer's problem.
Or whatever plans you had based on some sort of like, crazy math you did. It's not really the buyer's problem either.
Yeah,
so,
we had an agent recently, and this was not this person's fault at all. I mean, it was more the seller, but they had put a bunch of money into the house, and they were like, "We're only selling at this price." Well, the fact that you put a bunch of money into the house and it's not worth that, that's your problem.
Right.
It's not the buyer's problem or any other buyer's problem. It's the fact that you put more money into the house than it was worth. So that's a conversation that's impossible to have with a seller.
Absolutely. I find that most sellers have plans for their equity, and they typically have overvalued their equity in the home. And so sometimes you're coming in and crushing their dreams, or you're crushing, or you're at the very least, you're messing up their plan, right? For what they had perceived as the amount of equity, because they're not selling houses enough to know what it costs to sell a house, and or they've also typically overinflated the value of their property based on something that their neighbor said. So you got to keep that in mind. And I think that it's worth it to have that discussion at the top of, again, in a seller consultation, be like, hey, listen, typically what I'm dealing with sellers is, hearsay from a neighbor and plans they give you for equity. So is it okay if I'm completely honest with you and tell you what the value of your property is? And then we can make plans after the fact. So anyway, keep that in mind. The other thing, I have a little bit of a story with this one. Your first offer, 95% of the time. And by the way, this is, again, not to overstate my veteran time or my time in real estate, but in 15 years of real estate, 90% of the time, your first offer is your best. And I've had sellers that go, no, we're going to wait. No, I'm offended by that offer.
I'm trying to think back. I mean, like, that's usually true.
Yeah.
Even when I've sold my own houses, that's almost always true.
Yeah. Even if you turn down that first offer, the second one that comes in is not going to be better 90% of the time. So basically what you do is you take that first offer, even if it feels a little low, you work it up and you take the offer.
Yeah, I mean, if you really unpack that, it makes a lot of sense, because the first person, let's say you just list, and the first person to make that offer is probably really in love with that house.
Right.
They want to move in. They're ready to go. They've committed. They're submitting the offer. Whereas the longer it's on the market, it's rare that people just like, oh, I just saw this one. Well, if it's been on the market for 30 days, it's not the first time you've seen it.
Yeah, days on market is a slow bleed in terms of value. And so you're typically going to cost yourself, because the first question that buyers ask when they walk in a house, by the way, is number one is how much is it, because they forgot. And the second question they ask is how long has it been on the market, because they want to see how good of a deal that they can get. So
because they forgot.
They did.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, you're seeing 5 houses. They don't remember what everything was. It's like it's in their
funny.
price range. They're like, how much is this one? How long has it been on the market? Because they just want to know. It's like, could I work a deal on this one if they like it?
I can like see every buyer I've ever worked with in my head when you said that.
But the story I was going to tell is, like, I had this group of investors. They had gotten together. This is back in Oklahoma days. And they called me and said, hey, we heard you're a great real estate agent. We'd love to work with you in this investment group. And they'd said, I was like, okay, great. Like, how many people are in your group? And there's like 6 or 7 people in this group. I'm like, okay, already. Like, the money's being split too many different ways. And I'm like, okay, well, so they had bought a house at auction and they were redoing it. And they came to me and they go, okay, well, we brought them an offer on the house. So I listed it and we brought an offer. I said, listen, the thing to do on this is your first offer is always your best. You need to work up the offer, and then accept it and move on to your next project. But they really pushed back. So I was like on speakerphone with their board, right, that owned 3 houses at the time. And they're like, well, we know about this new highway that's coming in, and we really feel like the intrinsic value of the property is going to be more, and blah, blah, blah. But sure enough, I ran into one of the investors later on down the road. It was probably 6 months later, and she said, yeah, we ended up selling that thing for $20,000 less than that first offer, and we should have listened to you.
Yeah.
And sellers just need to realize it's like you putting more days on the market is not going to add value. You getting offended at an offer is not going to add value. You need to, and I will admit that sometimes people come in low. Sometimes buyers come in, they want to get a good deal. And that realtor on the other end is trying to get an offer on the table and get them emotionally bought in. And you just need to work it up as high as you can. And typically you're going to be within 3% of the asking price, and you should accept it and move on.
Yep.
Now, with the caveat that if you get just like a ridiculous offer, okay, yeah, you can turn that down, on day 2 or day 3. But if it's day 17 and you've got an offer and it's relatively close, you just need to go ahead and accept it. Okay. So some of the finer points of negotiation. Number one, keep everyone in play. Keep everybody talking. There's always a little room left in the negotiation to keep people moving. So where I go with this is like, either it's the buyer or the seller, and they go, "This is our final offer."
Yep.
Tell them this. We're not going any higher than this.
I mean, and the longer you're in it, the more emotionally invested you are. So,
Right.
Not their final offer.
Right. So I typically find that if we can just work the buyer or the seller, even like $500 or $250, just something to keep everybody in play, it will typically work out.
Yeah, get creative.
So as the realtor, even when a client tells you, this is my final offer, first of all, it's not. And second of all, don't tell them that. That's the buyer or seller being emotional.
Yeah.
So, it's like, you're not going to pay $250 more. Really, you're not going to accept $250 less. Typically, people are just reacting. They have this emotional reaction, and they're communicating that emotional reaction. But there's always a little room left. So the game is to keep everybody in play. Keep them moving. Okay? Number 2, do not make enemies with the other agent.
This one is so important. So important. This is the only other person in the transaction that wants exactly what you want, which is to close this property.
Yeah.
And, getting on their team, having you both work your respective sides to get a deal done is the only way this works.
Right.
If you get into fights with this person, nobody wins.
Let me tell you, here's the other thing I'll say is, like, if you're getting into a fight with someone, or you've got an adversarial relationship with the buyer and the seller, once the offer is accepted, you're increasing the likelihood of it busting at the inspections.
Yeah, they're going to find any way they can to get it to bust.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to deal with you.
Right.
And, before I submit an offer, if I'm working with a buyer, I'm calling the agent to get, start to build up rapport. Once the offer's submitted, I'm calling to continue that process. As we work through the contract, I'm making sure they have what they need. I'm approaching it as in, we're friends now, we're in it, and we both want the same thing.
Well, and if you're the agent that wants to bully that other agent on the other side, I promise you they're going to internalize that resentment, and it's going to come out at some point in the transaction. And it's typically not going to work to your favor.
Yeah. I mean, that works in all negotiation. Emotional intelligence is the most important thing. You have to understand that talking down to someone or trying to push your way to get what you want is never going to work.
Man, no, it's not. Because at the slightest opportunity, that agent's going to try to get you back. And I'm not consciously, subconsciously. It's just a matter of like psychology that internalized resentment is coming out somewhere.
Yeah. The way to win a negotiation is to understand the feelings that person has in that point in the negotiation, and work to get them to feel like the end result was their idea. That's all it is.
That's exactly right. And again, that's nuanced. It's not easy.
No, it's not easy.
You're going to pick that up over time, but yeah, I completely agree. So again, don't create an adversarial relationship with the other agent. And the third thing is just keep goodwill in the deal. Don't internalize, don't mirror or match your client's emotions. You want to be the calm, knowledgeable, wise person in the room.
Act like you've been there.
Act like you've been there. I like that. But yes, just keep some goodwill. Even if your clients are drawing lines and, you tell them to, X, Y, Z, don't pass that on. That's just them that's just their reaction. That's their emotional reaction. And so, yeah, don't keep everybody moving forward with goodwill, right? Be the, what's the word? The mediator, in the situation. The biggest challenge that you'll face as an agent is when you have an agent on the other side of the transaction that is inexperienced and or uncoached. And so you just have to realize that in all cases, the more you can work to bring a deal together in terms of like, you know, what you were talking about, emotional intelligence, being understanding, keeping goodwill in the deal, don't draw lines in the sand, the better. Because there's a lot of scenarios in which that agent, what we're talking about, the other agent will do.
Yeah.
And you have to keep your head.
Yeah. Empathy, even if it's faked in a negotiation, is important.
Yeah.
You have to be able to understand how the other person is perceiving the situation.
Right.
And you'll never arrive at a solid place unless you do, or unless you can.
Yeah. And I would say like even acknowledge and praise the other agent for working hard for their clients, because they are. And so, you know, one of the things that I'll say is like, hey, I understand you're working really hard for your clients.
You're doing just what I would do in that situation.
You're doing what I would do. I wish you were my realtor.
Yeah.
You know, you need to encourage and acknowledge the agent on the other side, even when it might get a little tense. You know, what is the biblical scripture? It's like a kind word turns away wrath. So the more that you can put yourself in get on the same team with the other agent, the better that negotiation is going to go, and suck the emotions out of it. Just work with the factual details, get on the same page as the other agent, or get on the same team with the other agent, and you can carry this thing to closing. Because at the end of the day, the win for everyone is that a deal gets done, your clients get the house that they like, or your clients sell the house for a price that serves them, and you move on down the road.
Yep.
All right.
Is that it?
I think so. I mean, just to recap, let's see here. You know, again, negotiation is not it's not what people think it is. It's not Hollywood. Set expectations is one of the most important parts, because most of the negotiation is done before the offer is ever written, in setting expectations with your clients. Make sure that you are making offers according to comps, framing the scenario in a way that works for all parties.
Real quick, sorry.
Yeah.
My mentor, I kind of learned a lot of my negotiation strategies from him. And I used to negotiate just massive deals on the IT side back when I was in my CIO days. And
right.
he always used to say, it's, you know, negotiation's not a boxing match. It's a finesse sport. And I was like, that's really great, because everyone goes into negotiation thinking, I'm going to, like at a car dealership, I'm going to beat this guy up and I'm going to walk away with the best price I possibly can.
Right.
And that attitude will lose you more negotiations than it'll win you.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's a finesse sport.
Yeah.
And by the way, your mentor was, I mean, a pretty significant player in the business world.
Yes. Owned several different healthcare companies and sold them along the way. Really, really large organizations. If I named a few of them, most people would know what they were.
Yeah.
But yeah, big player in the healthcare space.
Cool. Again, you know, price things right, make good offers based on comparables, and you know, and when you get in the finer points, keep everybody in play, be on the same team with the other agent, and keep goodwill in the deal. Okay, any final words from you?
Nope, that's it.
Okay, awesome. We've got some really exciting podcasts coming up, some great leaders that are going to be with us on the show. So we look forward to meeting with them and seeing you guys next time. Have a good one.